This hearing will come to order. Good morning, everyone. We once again meet to keep abreast of the National Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite System. When launched, NPOESS will be the primary source of information the National Weather Service uses to make its long-range forecasts. Military services will need NPOESS data to plan operations around the globe. This committee has given sustained attention to this program because it is very vital to our daily lives. NPOESS is having a difficult birth. The Government Accountability Office once more has to report that instability continues to beset the program. Last year, GAO recommended that the program managers needed to complete the basic planning and management documents to assure that everyone understands the schedule, the objectives, and the resources. It's a year later, and GAO still has to recommend getting this basic task done. The Undersecretary for Defense for Acquisitions, Logistics, and Technology, Mr. John Young, has ordered these to be finished by the end of August or funding will be cut off. Admiral Lautenbacher will assure us most strenuously that this time the paperwork will get finished. And I'd like to have had Mr. Young here to talk about his memorandum views on the management of the NPOESS program. Unfortunately, it wasn't until last week that we knew it had been issued. I hope Admiral Lautenbacher will explain why a memo he received in May didn't reach us until June, and then from GAO. This committee, under both Democratic and Republican leadership, has done its utmost to assist NOAA in keeping this program on track. The committee is always expected to be kept fully and completely informed, and I expect Admiral Lautenbacher to assure us that costs for this program are still not under control. Despite assurances that the program was adhering to its $12.5 billion life cycle cost estimate, GAO believes that we can expect another increase of $1.1 billion. Some $300 million represents the cost of recovery from the problems with the sensors last year. Technical problems are still not resolved. A week ago today, NOAA informed us that some of the screw heads on the VIIRS instrument were found to be sheared off as it was being prepared. Early indications are that the posts into which the screws were driven were improperly made. Is the worst case, the VIIRS unit will have to be completely disassembled to replace all of these so-called jack posts. Doing so will mean yet another delay in launching the NPP precursor mission. While NOAA hopes that this won't be required, the history of VIIRS argues that the worst case is only half as bad as what not the situation that we hope to be in at this point in time. The Executive Committee must expeditiously make decisions and act to resolve these problems. The risk of a data gap is growing along with the cost of this program. This committee wants to know why, know how these programs are going to be resolved and when we expect some good news. Well, welcome back our witnesses, Mr. Powner and Admiral Lautenbacher, for whom this is familiar ground, and recognize Mr. Inglis for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing about the National Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite System, NPOESS. This hearing continues close oversight of this vital weather satellite program, oversight that started under Republican leadership of this committee. Last June, we met to discuss a GAO report's finding on the progress of the NPOESS program. Mr. Powner, you were here to present that report 1 year ago, and now you're back again with additional findings. This feels almost like Satellite Club reunion, I suppose. But in June of 2007, it seemed that the program was on track under the new plan. However, given the significant changes were being made to the capability of the system, I and many of my colleagues stressed that close oversight had to continue, or the repercussions would be costly. And we're here again, and again we're stressing the importance of oversight, and rightly so, I think. Things are less at ease than they were last year. Costly is a good word to describe the progress of the program over the past 12 months. $12.5 billion was NPOESS price tag in June 2007. Today it's $13.6 billion. And there's another increase looming on the horizon. The Department of Defense has already announced that if major management documents are not finalized by September, DoD will remove funding. If that happens, the Department of Commerce would be forced to follow suit and remove funding as well. This loss of funding would mean a significant setback in the investment and progress of the NPOESS program. It is said that NPOESS is the most complex environmental satellite system ever deployed. And given what we've gone through in this committee alone in the past few years, I believe it. I also believe that all of us involved, Congress, NOAA, the Air Force, and NASA, have a vested interest in making sure that the system succeeds despite the complexities. NPOESS holds the capability for advanced climate and weather sensing, which, even in light of the cost, can mean great benefits for our country and for the world. NPOESS today is a $13.6 billion program. That's a lot of taxpayer money. We need weather satellites that are launched on time and to provide data that informs everything from decisions about our military troop operations to forecasting the path of hurricanes. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. I ask unanimous consent that all additional opening statements submitted by the committee members or by committee members be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. It's my pleasure to introduce our witnesses this morning. Mr. David Powner is the Director for Information Technology Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. Vice Admiral Conrad Lautenbacher is the Undersecretary for Oceans and Atmosphere and Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I might add at this point, yesterday I was at the Partnership for Public Service and witnessed a couple of your folks receiving some very nice public service awards. One of them happened to have been a classmate of mine from college, Dr. Eddie Beaumont, and it was a real pleasure seeing him, but more importantly, knowing what he has accomplished for our country. Very impressed. You'll each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you all complete your testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel, and Mr. Powner, you may be.
Chairman Lanson, Ranking Member Inglis, and members of the subcommittee, we appreciate the opportunity to testify on our latest NPOESS report being released today. This morning I will briefly address 3 areas. First, the status of NPOESS's restructuring, which is taking too long to complete and now raises serious questions about DoD's commitment to and funding of the program. Second, key risk areas and their potential cost implications, which will at least add $1 billion to NPOESS's life cycle costs. And third, the need for a long-term strategy to restore climate and space sensors that were removed from the NPOESS program as part of the June 2006 restructuring. Before discussing these 3 points, I'd like to highlight NPOESS's progress in several areas. The program has redefined deliverables, costs, and schedules, and renegotiated the contract, made significant progress in completing development and testing activities associated with spacecraft, sensors, and ground systems, and it continues to improve its management of the contractor and program risks. Last May, when we testified before you, Mr. Chairman, we raised serious concerns about interagency coordination because key acquisition documents were not signed by their September 2006 due date following the Nunn-McCurdy restructuring. We highlighted at that time the urgency in signing these documents to ensure interagency agreements. Although some documents have been finalized, agency executives have yet to finalize several key documents needed to effectively manage this tri-agency program, including the acquisition program baseline and a critical plan for how the European satellite data will be used with NPOESS. Now, DoD has stated that it will not release fiscal year 2009 funds to the program if these documents are not finalized by the end of August. On the surface, DoD's threat appears to be a good thing, given that the new August deadline is now nearly 2 years later than the original deadline. However, DoD is equally at fault here, since most of the documents in question are currently at DoD awaiting approval. Mr. Chairman, such delays, threats, and lack of leadership and cooperation are unacceptable. It is time for the NPOESS XCOM members to step up, get these documents finalized to ensure key interagency agreements and to not risk any funding implications. Regarding key risks and potential cost implications, key risk areas that concern us the most are the technical sensor risks, changes to the security approach, and the uncertainty of operations and support costs. Poor workmanship and delays caused an 8-month slip in the delivery of VIIRS, which caused a corresponding 8-month slip in the launch of NPOESS' demonstration satellite, NPP. The CRIS sensor has also experienced cost overruns and schedule delays. But VIIRS continues to be the program's largest question mark. It's complex, continues to experience problems in testing, and is clearly the most concerning aspect of this acquisition. The program estimates that it will cost at least an additional $300 million to fix these known technical sensor issues. Turning to security, the program is considering raising the level of security measures associated with NPOESS' ground stations. The program has been looking at these options, but is yet to release its findings or agree to a final approach. Building in security late in the development cycle will be costly. Regarding the operations and support costs, following the Nunn-McCurdy decision, the operations and support costs were estimated to be about $1 billion. Now both the Program Office and DoD's Cost Analysis Group are refining the estimate, which we expect to be at least $800 million higher. Therefore, between the technical sensor issues, increasing security controls, and having a more realistic operations and support estimate, we expect the $12.5 billion life cycle cost estimate to increase at least $1 billion, but would not be surprised if the revised life cycle cost estimate approaches $14 billion. Finally, Mr. Chairman, some progress has been made in restoring selected climate and space sensors that were removed to reduce risk and cost during the Nunn-McCurdy decision. Specifically, 2 sensors are being placed on NPP, and 1 will now go on the first NPOESS satellite known as C1. These will both help with short-term needs. In addition, options for restoring these sensors have been studied. Now decisions need to be made and plans need to be developed for longer-term continuity of climate and space sensors. The Office of Science and Technology Policy has been working with the 3 agencies, but there is no firm commitment when such a plan would be developed. Accordingly, we recommended that a plan be developed to ensure that there are no gaps in critical space, environmental, and climate observations. In summary, Mr. Chairman, the NPOESS program needs to finalize key acquisition documents, revise its life cycle cost estimate, given the expected increases associated with sensor security and operations and support, and on a broader scale, our nation is in need of a plan to address long-term continuity of climate and space observations. This concludes my statement. Thank you for your leadership and oversight of this critical program.
Thank you, Mr. Powner. Admiral Lautenbacher, to recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Lamson, Ranking Member Inglis, and distinguished members of the committee and staff, I appreciate this opportunity to provide an update on the development of the NPOESS, the National Polar Orbiting Operational Environmental Satellite System program, and discuss the latest Government Accountability Office report. I continue to value and use the input and insight provided by Mr. Powner and his team at GAO. NOAA's 2 environmental satellite programs are the backbone of the nation's hurricane and severe weather forecasting and warning capabilities. Today we are here to talk about our next generation polar satellite program, NPOESS. As you know, the original goal of the NPOESS program was to combine the polar satellite needs and requirements of the Air Force and NOAA into one program, while also providing a continuation of certain NASA satellite measurements, mostly in the climate area. While it has been said before, I must reiterate, satellite acquisitions are complex and difficult endeavors. This program also has the additional complexity of being a tri-agency effort made up of the Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, and NASA. Now, because of the Executive Committee's key decisions that were begun prior to the Nunn-McCurdy review in 2006, management and oversight of this program has been vastly improved, but we still face significant challenges as outlined by GAO. It is important for the committee to understand that, as mentioned in the GAO testimony, the other four main instruments, as well as the satellite bus and ground system, are on budget, on schedule, and performing well in testing with no significant concerns. I continue to remain concerned, however, about contractor performance and management as it pertains to the Visible Infrared Imager Radiometer Suite, known as VIIRS. VIIRS continues to be our most challenging instrument to develop. With the government management system now in place, I believe we are better positioned to identify, contain, and manage proactively the challenges as they arise. After testing late last year, for example, showed some technical problems with cooling systems and circuit boards, a complete review was held, and the delivery of the instrument had to be delayed about 8 months, which in turn delayed the NPP NASA launch by 8 months from September to 2009 to June 2010. There was no effect on the C1 through C4 satellite schedule. Within 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks, to indicate our ability to keep the committee updated, within the last 2 weeks during integration testing, as mentioned, the program uncovered some quality and workmanship issues with certain fasteners, which hold the different pieces of VIIRS together. I'm happy to report this morning that we received an update last night from our technical assessment team that the effect of this manufacturing flaw will likely be very minimal to the program. At this time, we do not anticipate it will delay the delivery of the VIIRS sensor to NPP. We believe this issue is under control at this point. The Cross-Track Infrared Sounder, CRIS, is undergoing final preparation for delivery at the end of July 2008 to begin integration on the NPP satellite. The Ozone Mapping and Profiler Suite, called OMPS, the LIM and nadir instruments that will fly on NPP have been tested and integrated as a unit. Specifically regarding GAO's most recent report on NPOESS, the first recommendation calls for plans to restore the climate and space sensors removed from the NPOESS program by June 2009. As the committee knows, this has been a high priority for NOAA and the administration. The XCOM has approved restoring the OMPS LIM and series instruments onto NPP and remanifesting TSIS onto the first NPOESS satellite. Meeting the deadlines to integrate these instruments onto NPP and the first NPOESS satellite will require fully funding the administration's $74 million climate sensor request in the fiscal year 09 budget. I am pleased to indicate that we have gained support from the appropriations committees for these initiatives and look forward to successful work on restoring these sensors. We are actively working on plans for the rest of the climate sensors demanifested from NPOESS. In the near term, for altimetry, the JASON 2 mission is expected to launch this month, and we have begun preliminary work on the JASON 3 mission, which will allow continuity through the next couple of decades. With regard to aerosol measurements, they will be continued through the NASA's upcoming GLORY mission, and we will look at the results from that and work on the follow-on. Regarding the restoration of the space weather sensors, we continue to work closely with NASA, the Air Force, and the space weather user community to ensure that plans address user requirements. We have provided the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House with a report earlier this year to explain what the issues are, and we are awaiting further direction for the next steps and expect that to happen shortly. The second recommendation by GAO reemphasizes the prior recommendation that appropriate NASA, NOAA, and DOD executives immediately finalize key acquisition documents. I wholeheartedly agree with this recommendation. We have made significant progress. 16 of the 22 documents have been finalized. My team and I have been working very hard with the XCOM and DOD to reach the agreements required to complete the 6 outstanding ADM documents. I am prepared to go through each one and explain the issues that are involved with them if you desire, or I can provide that for the record. Let me conclude by addressing some concerns that have arisen from a recent internal memo by Mr. John Young, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. This memo discussed performance measures for NPOESS components, new cost estimates for the operations of NPOESS, alternative management studies, and completion of the ADM documents. Regarding performance measures for NPOESS, let me assure the committee that I and my XCOM partners are committed to ensuring NPOESS fulfills its 6 key performance parameters. NPOESS will provide roughly 10 times more data at 4 times the speed of our current satellites, so it's a significant increase, and it continues to be on track to do that. Mr. Young's memo was trying to clarify that the whole NPOESS program shouldn't be put at risk to meet a specific performance capability. I agree, as the XCOM does with Mr. Young. I further clarified in a response letter that the user community and the ExecCom should be involved in any decisions about changes to performance, given the non-concurrent review and our charge to manage the program. During the Nunn-McCurdy review, the focus, I'm on cost estimates now, the focus of cost estimators was on the development and the launch of the satellite program, not on the out-year operational costs which occur far down the line. After the NPOESS contract had been restructured last fall, the XCOM asked the program budget staff to re-examine the original 2002 estimates for NPOESS operational costs used during the Nunn-McCurdy review. We then asked the DoD independent cost estimators for its review of the operations costs to ensure we have the best information available to deal with this program. Given that the program will now last longer, 3 to 4 years longer, it appears that an additional $1 billion is potentially required. We are reconciling at this point the different estimates, and the Executive Committee will make any final budget decisions on the expected increases. These additional operations costs would not be effective until beginning in the 2017 timeframe. They would be normal costs that are applied to our budget as we apply operations costs today to run the satellites that we have in position. They are, again, not part of the procurement and development costs. This time frame gives us time to examine alternatives to ensure the most cost-effective solution for these requirements. We believe we have alternatives to deal with those estimates as they exist today. In addition, the program budget staff and the independent cost estimators have identified some likely growth in the NPOESS development and production costs due mostly to the ongoing problems with VIIRS, as mentioned, and that regards the need to retain personnel as the next VIIRS units are built. Estimates for these additional costs are still being finalized, and we will reconcile them. It is part of our deliberate process to ensure that next year's budget is properly developed and to ensure completion of this system. The Nunn-McCurdy certification called for the government to make a decision in 2010 whether to proceed with the third and fourth NPOESS satellites under the existing contract or develop an alternative management structure, such as a different prime contractor or having the government manage the instrument production, for instance. PEO has completed and reported to Mr. Young on the first phase of this study and indicated that today no immediate management changes were warranted given what's been put in place. However, the XCOM has asked for 6-month updates as the PEO and the independent review team examine all aspects of the program for any possible changes in preparation for the 2010 decision. Finally, with regard to Mr. Young's memo, some may suggest its call for the administrative documents to be completed by September 2008 or DoD funding would be reevaluated shows a lack of commitment to the program. The DoD, from my experience, the DoD, the Air Force, and the Department of Commerce and the nation need NPOESS to succeed. It's crucial to our ability to forecast weather for the warfighter, for our nation's citizens, and for its impact on the nation's economy. And since Mr. Young and his office are part of the ADM document process, and I have talked to their office this morning, I have confidence that we can all work together to finish this job very quickly. I appreciate the committee's continued interest in the success of the NOAA satellite programs. I believe we are doing everything we can possibly think of and bring into effect to keep this program on track. We have instituted large-scale management and oversight reforms. We have government officials at contractor facilities participating in daily activities and daily oversight meetings. We measure the daily cost, schedule, and performance of the program at innumerable levels at this point. We are making progress, as indicated, but technical and manufacturing problems can and will continue to arise, I believe, and we will continue to do our best to fix them. I'm happy to expand on any of these points and to answer questions from the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Admiral Lautenbacher. Let's start with Mr. Powner, and let me return or go to the discussion about the Executive Committee. This committee has been told that the Executive Committee represents the group responsible for the top decisions in the NPOESS program. We've had many concerns about the XCOM performance. You've seen the XCOM in operation. What to you explains the repeated difficulty in getting decisions made on this on the NPOESS issues?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think when we look at these key acquisition documents, the one area where we want to fault the program is at the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee was put in place to ensure that we worked appropriately across organizational boundaries. We have different cultures, we have different bureaucratic processes. We're running into that, but that is still no excuse. The Executive Committee needs to step up and to ensure that these key acquisition documents get signed. I think the threat from DOD is not a bad thing, given that we now have this August deadline to get these signed. But DOD is equally at fault here. I mean, almost every one of the documents they mention in their memo are awaiting approval at DOD.
At just the one agency, Department of
No,
Defense?
there's also, we had information as of 2 days ago, and there still were some documents within the Department of Commerce that needed approval also. So we have multiple organizations that need to agree to these documents and to ensure that they get signed off so that we can move forward. And it is key that we have interagency agreement here. I mean, one of these documents is the approved baseline. There's a fundamental question about what baseline are we working off and when are we going to start the clock ticking for perhaps, measurement for the next Nunn-McCurdy decision. So right now we don't have a baseline that we're marching off of right now.
Is it the individuals who sit on the committee, or is it the culture of the agencies that's preventing the individuals who are sitting on the committee from being able to make these decisions?
Both. I think the individuals on the Executive Committee were put in place to work within their organizations, but clearly, as I'm sure the Admiral would agree, there are individuals above him at both organizations where there has been a hang-up. But still, that is no excuse for the Executive Committee not to step up and to work upwards to get these key documents approved.
Admiral, in the period leading up to the Nunn-McCurdy restructuring of NPOESS, this committee examined a good bit of the communications that went from the Integrated Program Office to the XCOM. We became concerned because it appeared that at a time when the program needed firm leadership, the XCOM regularly postponed decisions, if it met at all. The department's Inspector General determined that the XCOM did not challenge optimistic statements by the program manager, even as the VEERS instrument fell further behind schedule and grew in cost. You testified to the committee at a hearing 2 years ago that there would be quarterly XCOM meetings, and you, quote, insisted that management processes must be made more transparent and auditable and strengthened at all levels, unquote. Has the Executive Committee reverted to their old habits?
No, we have not. There has been significant changes made in the process as a result of the Nunn-McCurdy review and the steps that we actually took before the Nunn-McCurdy review began. I am happy to go through. We have agreed and we have bent schedules and made sure that we have had quarterly meetings, whether we needed one or not. They are auditable, they are trackable, and I'm happy to provide the record of all the decisions that were made. There have been 9 XCOMs since that particular meeting. There have been over 40 decisions made to ensure this program stays on track in a timely and meaningful manner. There have been dozens of phone calls and personal interactions to deal with this. This is a program that, in my experience in 40 years of working in the Navy and 7 years, that I have never seen this level of detail and involvement at the agency head level in the individual management of a program as is taking place in NPOESS. So this is providing, we have provided a baseline for continual dialogue. It still is a difficult program to manage because of the 3 agencies you mentioned, the culture before. But I want to iterate that the issue with this program is not necessarily the management structure at this point. It's contractor performance on a particular instrument called VEERS. And that's where we're focusing our attention, and that's the issue that needs to be solved to make this program come around and be on schedule and meet the needs. And we are focused intently on getting that system in place.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Powner? That's the primary or the single
I agree
issue
that
here?
the performance of yours is the largest question mark on this program. However, the threat to withhold funding with these documents not being signed is a big issue. If in fact funds are withheld for fiscal year 09, it has a devastating effect because of the matching that needs to occur with the NOAA funding portion. So I agree that VEERS is the #1 problem in contractor performance, but now that we got this new wrinkle with DOD throwing in the threat to withhold funding, this is a big deal.
Okay, my time is up in just a few seconds, so I'm going to hold hold my question for a minute, and I'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Inglis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a couple of key questions. I suppose one is cost, which we've been discussing. The other is continuity. And Admiral, is that you're confident that we've got continuity regardless of this, in spite of this delay? Is that correct?
Yes, I am confident we have the continuity. There has been a delay in NPP, but the systems that are in place today and the N prime satellite, which has not been launched yet, which will be launched after next year, will last long enough to cover the gap. There has been no effect on the C1 launch. So the satellites that we have to launch to the, to have available for coverage are sufficient to cover the time until the C1 instruments are launched in 2013.
At some point we start getting, if we're trying to cross this intersection, we get the yellow light, and we're squeezing the orange here. At some point we're going to get the red light. So when is the, we're still safely in it's a green light, is that right? We're not even in the yellow yet?
We are still safely in the green light given the Nunn-McCurdy review that we had. Remember, we had to delay the program because of the initial manufacturing problems with the VIIRS instrument. This instrument has experienced problems across the whole, and let me say that versus what the XCOM has been doing, that I have been personally on this VIIRS issue since I took over this job and have been beating up on the contractors in the program office to deal with VIIRS. So it's not an unknown problem to the XCOM, and the XCOM has been involved in working on trying to resolve problems with VIIRS for a long, long time. So it's not an issue that there is absentee management from a government perspective on the issue. But given that statement, the change in the delay of NPP will not affect the continuity of our system at this point. There is sufficient overlap of the satellites that we have in orbit and stocked up to continue our coverage as we have today.
Mr. Powner, does GAO agree that as we approach this continuity intersection, the light's still green? We're not in the yellow yet, or?
Yeah, we would agree with that. I think the key deadlines, NPP now has a June 2010 date, and then C1 is January 2013. If those start to slip, then it's another story, and there's a new ball game here. The other thing, too, is if NPP would slip, that was a demonstration satellite that we were to learn and then incorporate that into further build. So if that would happen to slip, you lose that opportunity to incorporate those lessons learned.
Yeah. So this is good news that it's a very important project. It's going to provide important data for military and civilian purposes. So we've got continuity covered, and that's good. How about it seems a little bit funny for DOD to maybe a good defense is a good a good defense is a good offense, or no, a good offense is a good defense, I guess is what it is. Maybe what they're trying to do is just, if they have the documents and they're not working and they're not moving them, then what's the deal on that? Why? Anybody got an observation about why they are being critical even though they may be holding the documents?
If I can respond for a minute, I have been very vocal publicly and privately about the need to get these documents done. And I expressed to DOD that I would like some help in getting these things signed, because many of the issues that need to be resolved are at offices that are above my pay grade. Mm-hmm. And so this is one of the results of that. These kinds, I don't want to call it a threat, but I'm hoping that there's enough attention. I do not believe this is an XCOM issue directly, although we're responsible for it, and I'm going to work this until the last I is dotted and T is crossed on it. But we are not lacking from the XCOM perspective in trying to press the system to sign off on these documents. And I would tell you that the progress we've made, that what's left to deal with on these documents is not critical to making progress on this program. I can go through each one of these documents and explain that to you if you wish at this point. But we have created 16 of these documents are signed, delivered, and working. We have a full schedule. We have a contract signed. We have monitors in progress. We have earned value. We have all of the pieces that we need to make progress day to day on this program and meet the schedules. What's left are important documents. They need to be signed, and I don't disagree with that. And I'm going to work extremely hard to try to make this deadline, and I am pleased that Mr. Young is interested in making the deadline too. I called their office this morning to make sure they were on board with this, and that's the word I got back. So I hope with this incentive there'll be more pressure to move the final wording, and there's only a few small points that are left on these documents to deal with.
That time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. And I recognize Mr. McNerney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, one of the things that you said that really struck me was that you've never seen agency head involvement at this level of detail. Now, my experience in industry is that when management gets involved in the details, it has a tendency to make things worse. And I certainly think there's an opportunity for that here. What's your opinion on that?
I think that's a good observation, and I have tried to be careful to do this in a way to not undercut the expertise and the value of the people put in place to make the decisions at the right level. I have been involved in this business for a long time too. I came to Washington in 1971. I've been an independent cost estimator. I've run programs. I've been a budgeteer. I have looked at management oversight over a wide variety of programs in the Navy, and I am very sensitive to the comment that you just made. When I say being involved, what I'm talking about is being briefed and being cognizant of it and making sure that as we make the decisions, we know as much in depth as possible in the time allotted to do it. I've not tried to interfere. I can't speak for my contemporaries, but I have not tried to interfere in micromanagement that I believe would be counterproductive to the smooth operation of the program.
That well, you just said you weren't involved in micromanagement, but does the progress with the documents is also taking place at the highest levels of the agency?
It is. Well, first of all, I brief the Deputy Secretary of Commerce every week on the full status of this program, including the documents. I also have internal to my organization a Program Management Council with my Chief Operating Officer that goes through the status at least monthly. I go through a monthly full-up status with my staff on what's going on. So I understand what's happening, and I push people when they need to be pushed, and I try to keep this working. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten the 16 of the 22 signed that we have, or be as close as we are on the last 6.
Thank you. As a scientist, I want to ask a little bit about the VIIRS sensor, but I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time before you could give me a good explanation of that. You mentioned that you got a call last night that indicated that that was going to be deliverable on time now.
Yes, sir.
How confident are you of that result, of that information?
As with all information that comes in without sufficient time to sit on it and to look at it and examine it, I always reserve the right to make sure that it's correct. We have asked for a full court press, obviously, in this particular issue, because I view it as a serious one, to look at what needs to be done to ensure that the fasteners are correctly in place and will maintain the integrity during the testing phase, which is where we are now. A full court press was put on day and night looking. We sent our own people out there, as well as, when I say government people, as well as the manufacturers people to look at it. And this is the report. We asked them to do it as quickly as possible because we had reported to the committee, and I wanted to have an answer today for you on where we stand on that, sir.
Mr. Powner, do you share his level of confidence with regard to the delivery of that sensor?
This is new information for us in terms of this, with the latest problem. The concern with VIIRS is this: every time you turn around and look at VIIRS, there's another manufacturing or technical problem. And there's been a history of that. So I think we're far from being out of the woods on VIIRS, and it still is the #1 concern on this program.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McNerney. Dr. Bartlett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. A couple of years ago, Admiral, when we had an oversight subcommittee hearing on this issue, there was some major concern that the delays in launching these satellites were going to result in a lapse of coverage. What has happened to fill that gap?
We've come down the road more than 2 years now. The satellite launches that we've scheduled for continuity have worked, basically, so we have 2 years more of experience, and we have satellites in orbit that are operating and providing us the information. So we have more confidence because we actually have hardware in the air that's functioning. So issues that could have caused a delay or excuse me, an absence of information coming from space have been covered by the fact that we've been successful in the program that we predicted we would be able to execute 2 years ago.
There are two general reasons for the delays here. One is the difficulties, coordination difficulties with this tri-agency. The other is that we have done here what we so often do in DOD, and that is we push the envelope and we never come to the point that says this is good enough. We have really pretty good weather data that's been coming in now for a number of years. Which of these has been the primary reason for the problems here? Has it been the difficulties of coordinating three very different agencies, or has it been that we just were too optimistic about what could be done with this technology?
I believe it's the latter, sir. I believe that we have been optimistic about the technology. The VIRS instrument, for instance, was supposed to be modeled after the MODIS instrument, which was an R&D instrument that's been working in space as an R&D instrument, not as an operational instrument. And people felt that, well, if we did this much with MODIS, we could do this much with VIRS, and we've already sort of built MODIS, so let's build a bigger VIRS. It hasn't been tested, so it's a new instrument, and it is having the same issues that we always have when we try to develop something new. I have been a proponent of doing more testing and incremental approaches to our capability to ensure that we have continuity, and I think that's why we are where we are. Well, that's one of the prime reasons we are where we are.
It is axiomatic, I think, that industry is going to be perhaps overly optimistic about what they can do because they're in the mode of selling, and they're going to win if they promise more. And frequently they promise more than can be realistically delivered. I worked for 5 years for an agency in the Navy that was kind of an honest broker. That's the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. And that lab never competes with industry, so industry will share their deepest proprietary secrets. But what the lab does is to tell the Navy, now more broadly the military and NASA, this is probably going to work, or this is probably not going to work. For programs like this, who do we have to turn to ask them, is it realistic to expect that industry really can do what they're promised to do?
We have the ability to go to a number of the FFRDCs or independent. John Hopkins is obviously a place where we can go, and we have used John Hopkins to help NOAA. I won't speak for the other agencies that are involved here. And we also use the Aerospace Corporation. We use Noblus company to deal with some of these issues. So NOAA uses independent advice to look at the the feasibility of moving into the future. And I want to say, I think your question is a very important one, that with one of the issues that the decisions that were made was to delay what's called the CMIS or the MIS instrument because we believed it was exactly the same problem we would have with VIRS. So we delayed that instrument. What we're doing with that instrument, so we revised the specs on it. We are engaging, we had competition, if you want to call it that, with FFRDCs to give us the best proposal to design something that would work based on technology that's already been proven, and the Office of the Naval Research Laboratory, NRL, is now building a prototype for us which will transfer the technology to an industry partner to build it with hopefully a lot less risk and more assurity that when that instrument goes on C2, it will work and it will be within cost and schedule. So I think your comments are very pertinent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Bartlett. The chair will recognize himself for the next 5 minutes. Admiral, the committee appreciates receiving the presentation on the alternative management study, which your staff was kind enough to send us last night, got it at 10:24. I note that the team convened to evaluate changes said this: XCOM is too senior to provide the routine immediate assistance often needed at this stage of a program. Well, that seems to say that XCOM isn't adding any value to the NPOESS management. Can you comment on that, please? Would you agree?
Could you read? I'm not sure. I would have to get the context of that. Obviously, there are many things that we're probably, as brought up in the previous questioning about micromanagement of various things. What is the particular reference there? Because I think we should play in the alternative management study in terms of the strategies that are used for the future. I'll make sure I understand. I'm going to make sure I understand what you're.
It's in a chart.
Okay.
It's talking about the existing program structure.
And it says.
XCOM is too senior to provide the routine, immediate assistance often needed at this stage of a program.
Well, okay, and I'd have to look at the chart. Let me discuss the philosophy and what's involved with that and what's involved with the XCOM. First of all, XCOM sounds like it's a bad title from an old science fiction movie. Okay, it's not some magic deal. It's just the agency heads. So it's the agency heads that are responsible for these programs.
But it's those people who are supposed to be able to make the management decisions to move this thing forward. Yes, it is, and at that level. So there is always an issue of what, and in fact, we've had this issue of where the acquisition authority milestone ought to be in the Department of Commerce. Should it be with the Secretary? Our independent reviews said it probably should not be with the Secretary because he doesn't have the time or the ability to be able to deal at the levels needed to add value to that. So it should be at a lower level. And it came down, it was at my level that it was put. So there are always questions as to what levels decisions should be made. We have tried to balance the decisions with the information that comes up, and you have to be careful not to micromanage areas where you may not have enough information to be able to do it. So in this particular one, I have to go back and look at this chart to be sure, because I'm not sure what this chart is exactly trying to imply. Well, I would imagine that something wouldn't make it to this committee unless the lower level needed the help of that decision and couldn't go forward in the event that it didn't have it. And I would hope that they would be asking those things that they most critically need of the XCOM and be able to move forward from there. You testified that gaining concurrence on the NPOESS acquisition documents has been challenging to coordinate through a tri-agency process. What precisely are the areas of disagreement that have stretched this process out for more than a year?
Well, you have to walk a mile in my moccasins before you can really understand this, and it's hard to say, well, you just why isn't this done? There are a number of offices in each bureaucracy that deal with this. So there are at least 5 big bureaucracies. There's the Department of Commerce, above my pay grade. There's the Department of Defense, above the pay grade of the Air Force. Then there's the Department of the Air Force. Those are big departments. They have their own lawyers. They have their own acquisition program management structures. They have their own connections with the operating forces, Space Command that comes in and kibitzes on each one of these. Their comments come up and down these various levels. Then they come across to us to see if we agree. We turn them around as quickly as we can and get them back over there. So by the time you work this
Let me interrupt and ask. I've got less than a minute left.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Talk about some. You said you had the documents. It shows some of those differences. Tell us what.
Let me tell you where we are. First of all, as I've said before, these documents that are not signed with the I's dotted and T's crossed yet are not holding up progress on this program and are not affecting our ability to manage it and create the progress
but
that
what-
we need.
give me an
today.
example of something
Okay.
that is.
Okay, here, first, I'm sorry, say again?
An example of something that is.
I don't have any
Decision to-
examples on this list that are. The 7, and if you count the alternative management study, I've already explained what we're doing in alternative management study, and that's a decision to be made in 2010.
What's the disagreement then in the memorandum of agreement?
Okay. In the memorandum of agreement, it is about trying to define the authority of the acquisition executive in DOD. Remember that DOD is the acquisition authority. We work under their contract rules, and this is an internal DOD issue to line up the I's and T's to make sure the lawyers, this is being massaged by lawyers at this point, to ensure that the wording is exactly correct. Now, I want to point out that the memorandum of agreement, there is a memorandum of agreement in place, and we're working under it. We worked under it for the Nunn-McCurdy, and it is effective, and we follow the rules, and we are trying to make a couple of changes to it.
Okay, does it need to be changed because of
It
non-McCurdy?
does. It does
And
need.
when will it be?
I'm have to defer to the Department of Defense on that. We are under oath, or we're under the gun to do this by the end of August. I'm going to do everything I can to have them get this
Okay,
finished.
you can't force them to do it. What is it going
can't
to take
force
to
them.
make them do it? Do we have to take action?
I certainly hope not. I certainly hope that there's enough.
Hey, the award fee plan is
Okay.
awaiting the Commerce
Yeah.
Department decision. What's the problem with that?
No, it's the fee management plan. First of all,
Fee
the
management
award fees are done, taken care of. This is the fee management plan. There's one concern left from NASA, and their concern is to talk about the specific issues on on-orbit performance, something way down the road. The fee management plan, we have put in place a much stronger fee management plan. It's been agreed to in the contract, agreed to by, this was, remember, a complaint that we got several years ago that you're not pushing the contractor enough. So remember, that has totally changed, agreed to, and is in operation today. So that's not an issue. So the fee management plan on which we're operating and forcing control by the contractor is in place. This is about something that's in the future. We expect this to be done very short. In fact, the word I have this morning, like the technical issue that I mentioned, is that the concerns are done and this is ready to be signed. It will be signed today or tomorrow. I was hoping it would be signed before we got here, but it's just about done.
Okay, let me pass for another round to Mr. Inglis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Powner, do you agree with the Admiral that the documents are not likely to, the lack of the documents being signed is not holding us up at this point?
Well, clearly, I think there are some items in those documents that are important, but what we know, a lot of these are minor issues. This is bureaucracy at its worst. I mean, these are things that need to get signed, and especially now that there's a threat to future funding of the program. These are items that we need to and one other thing with the XCOM, if we have a bureaucratic process, the executives are put in place to work through the bureaucracy and to get things done. That's what executives do, whether it's below you, above you, or at your level. And so, again, I just want to reiterate that I think the executives need to step up and ensure that these key documents get signed.
Why would I'm trying to figure out why the DOD would threaten to withdraw or threaten to not meet the payment schedule or withdraw funding. They have as much interest in this as NOAA does, right? And if they are in fact holding the documents, I'm still mystified by that.
That circular argument is perplexing, although I will add, if you look back on the history of the NPOESS program, there are times when some of DOD's actions, and I mentioned this in my oral statement, where we question their commitment to the program. If you go back historically, they didn't fund the program fully at one point in time, and I think this is another action that just raises a red flag about their commitment to the program.
And why would that be? That is a helpful thing to know. I mean, they're thinking they don't, maybe this isn't their number one priority, or what's your guess on that?
Well, weather is clearly important to the Department of Defense in many areas. Clearly, there probably are other priorities, and right now they have legacy systems that provide the information they need.
Do they think that that the things that we're adding to this, the complexities, the additional sensors, all the kind of things, are beyond what their needs are, and they're sort of muscling their way to say, well, we really don't want that anyway, so we should
I
knock
think
that off?
you'll get different stories from DOD. In fact, we talked to many of the user groups who represent the Department of Defense, and they are clamoring for some of the information that will come out of the NPOESS program.
Mm-hmm. And Admiral Lautenbacher, do you have any theories on that, or?
Well, yes, and this is as I say, speculation. As I said, I talked to Mr. Young's assistant this morning, and there is concurrence that the documents, that they're interested in signing the documents, and they're interested in helping us sign the documents, and they're going to work hard. We're going to work together to try to make this happen. So that's why I'm hoping the committee does not have to step in and that we can finish this ourselves. I think there's two things going on. First of all, and again, having worked in DOD for a number of years, in services, I did work in DOD as well at one point. Mr. Young is relatively new in his position. He has a portfolio that has significant issues with it, as Dr. Bartlett mentioned, and he's trying to get control and hold of this monster that is the DOD defense establishment, and put some discipline and authority in it. And so he is, putting some markers on the table that we're going to do this right. We're going to manage by the book. We're going to provide the right documentation, and we're going to get. And I couldn't agree with him more. I agree with that. We need to do it, and I'm just as concerned as he is. And I have seen this before in the Department of Defense, because it's hard to coordinate documents within the Department of Defense, let alone with DOD, and NASA, where people have threatened to cut off the money because you didn't finish paperwork. And I don't want to say this is idle paperwork, but you didn't finish the job as designed in order to provide the baseline information for a program. So it's not an unusual tactic inside the Department of Defense to sort of enforce the need to do the job on time and do it well. And I think we're seeing some of that.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Bartlett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think there are probably three basic reasons for bureaucratic delays, and I'd like each of you to respond to this. One reason is that they just are incompetent. The second reason is that there's too much for them to do. They just can't get it done. The third reason is that there's not enough for them to do, which always results in delays. Dr. Parkinson has noted that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. As a matter of fact, it may grow even larger, because if you're a bureaucrat and there's really not enough for you to do, you make sure that it appears that you have too much to do by letting things pile up on your desk. I've noted that in our local county, where a building is way down, and now it takes twice as long to get a building permit through as it did when we were booming. Which of these three is the reason for the bureaucratic delays in this program?
I'd clearly go with number two in the lack of this being a priority. Too much and how it competes with other priorities.
I agree with that, but I would also say that I don't know enough about each one of the many offices that this goes through. I know about ours, and I would, from the ones I know about, I generally agree it's too much to do. And I would make the point that most of this documentation, and I've watched the after over 40 years, I've watched the documentation grow and grow and grow and grow, because they are requirements that have been added because somebody made a mistake somewhere, and you've got to make sure they're never going to make that mistake again. So you put a requirement in a document or a new document, and it grows and grows and grows, and we are victims to that process. Now, I'm not here to say these documents are unnecessary, but in fact, work has expanded, and there is an awful lot to do at this point to ensure that every I is dotted and T is crossed.
Dr. Parkinson also made another very interesting observation, and that was that the larger an organization gets, and with these three agencies, you're dealing with a lot of people, that the larger an organization gets, the more energy is spent in internal communications, and pretty soon, at some point, all the energy is expended in internal communications, and nothing gets done. And Admiral, your last comment seemed to indicate that there's a bit of that going on.
Yes, but we have made a great deal of progress on these documents, and after going through a lengthy review, the human mind's a very ingenious animal, and does things. The humans do things that. What happens in this system is that when you get to the point where you are totally absorbed in self-communications, we start load shedding, basically. And you find offices that are off to the side that don't get into the game anymore, because most responsible people who take on tasks know they have to complete the task, and they figure out some way to do it. And if that requires bypassing the bureaucracy, creating new processes that minimize their effect on it, it happens. And so I believe there's a continual cycle here of trying to get ahead of the problem, but more requirements keep getting piled on, and we're in that battle day by day.
It's always true, I think, that what's everybody's business is nobody's business. And I think one of the problems of this program is that there are too darn many people responsible for it. Why don't we have just one person responsible for it who makes the decision? He either lives or dies on the basis of those decisions. When you have a big bureaucracy like this, everybody is trying to protect themselves so that they can't be faulted for a failure. What can we do to get around this bureaucracy so that one person makes the decisions? Committees shouldn't be making decisions. People should be making decisions so that we can get the job done.
I agree, having now had to work with this system for a number of years. It is cumbersome. It's the first time we've tried to do a program like this with three large agencies with three different sets of requirements, three different sets of acquisition rules, three different sets of administrative documentation, etc. I think that there are things we could do to make the structure more streamlined, and my intention is to try to include that in this alternative management study that we're talking about, because this is not a good way to do business over the long term. And as I said before, human beings are ingenious. We'll work about ways to improve this. So that's my intention at this point, anyway.
Thank you, Dr. Bartlett. It's something we may have to keep in mind and make sure we learn a lesson, because something's going to be coming after this. We may not want to do this again in the manner in which it has been done. We were talking about some of the decisions that were pending, and you had made a comment about NASA, waiting on NASA's when we talked about the award fee plan and the management, the fee management plan.
Yes.
The report that we've got indicates that NASA was completed with its decision on June 4th, that we were ready with the Commerce Department concurrence. So what does that leave?
Yes, and we have word that they have completed it, but that was after it's sitting there for 3 or 4 months. So it's good to say it's out today, but you have to look at the whole history of this thing. And as I indicated, I believe that will be signed today or tomorrow. We have completed the fee management plan.
Money is truly, time is money, and we're looking at a lot of money. The acquisition program baseline, it's waiting for DOD, DOC determination, APP budget numbers.
Yes, and this we want to make sure, because this is a document that will be fundamental to the budget. Remember, we ask due diligence, the Executive Committee asked that we reevaluate the operations and support costs, because the operations support cost was carried forward from 2002. None of us believe that's accurate. So we asked that that be redone, because I don't want to have to come up and answer to the committee why we didn't do that. so that we have an independent cost estimate, we have a program estimate now, because we created the ability to be able to do that in our program, so we can provide program cost estimates, because we want to lay that into the acquisition program baseline. Right now, we have the people that did those budgets reconciling them. It's going to come back to the XCOM to review and then lay it in, and that's the last piece of this deal. It is basically the operations and support costs that we've talked about, and potentially the need for more reserve on VEERS, although that's not clear at this point, because we have been able to manage around the issues on VEERS with the estimate that we had created from the non-McCurdy. Remember, we've gone 3 years now with the budgets and the schedule that we've laid in because of our intention to make sure there was enough reserve to be able to handle issues like this that have come up.
Mr. Powner, would you comment on giving your feeling of the relationship between the earned value management system and the baseline management program, baseline program?
Well, that's one area where we've had some previous recommendations in this area, and I think the Admiral made some comments about how they get very detailed data. One of the things that's been very valuable on this program is when there is cost increase or a slip in schedule, folks know about it through the use of earned value techniques, and they know about it at very high levels. I know the Admiral made a comment to me at one time that he can hear a pin drop on this program. Well, that's good, because we want to be all over those costs and schedule issues. Now, we have a number of them that are coming up here, and we talked about this $1.1 to $1.5 billion cost increase. We just need to disclose that fully and move forward with an accurate baseline from this point forward.
Okay, let's shift gears. Admiral General Michiko was asked if she was confident that the NPOESS program would be executed for the estimated $12.5 billion in the life cycle cost for the program that emerged from Nunn-McCurdy. She said that she couldn't be definite while negotiations with Northrop Grumman were occurring to implement the new plan, but that she felt that it was the right number. Given what you know now, what is the life cycle cost?
I think the life cycle cost will have more operating costs at the end, so it's going to be larger than 12.5. I think it's likely to be somewhere between 12.5 and perhaps 13.5 in that region. But we are, I think, very close to where we need to be on this at this point in terms of, I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that everything's going to work perfectly for every nickel that's scheduled for the next 26 years, is what we're talking about here, and the next 20 years or so.
Mr. Powner, you've seen data on the life cycle cost. You briefed our staff that it appears there will be an increase of $1.1 billion in the estimate. What accounts for that number?
Yeah, I think at least we'll see a $1.1 billion increase, and that's roughly $300 million to address the technical issues with the sensors and $800 million associated with additional operations and support. But I will add to that there is a potential for increased security costs, and that range could also be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We're probably more in the camp that the life cycle cost is going to be closer to $14 billion.
Okay, if I add up, the lower end ranges that you just gave us, $1.2 billion in cost growth. If I add the high ends of the ranges, you get 1.8. So that it's already higher than last week. Where are you getting those numbers, and how much confidence do you have in them at this point?
We got those rough ranges from the program office. So, I think in our official statement we said at least $1 billion, but again, I think we'll be probably closer to the 1.5. One other point too, with the security issues that have been raised, we've taken a long time to make a decision on what our security approach is for the ground stations. The longer we sit on that, the likelihood that those costs are going to be going up. And the reason for that is when you build security in late in the development cycle, it's always more than if you build it in early. So that's a concern going forward.
Should any of these additional costs not be included in the final program baseline? If, for example, we incorporate the costs for VEERS recovery into the baseline, doesn't that give future managers a false impression of the program's cost and schedule performance?
Well, I think the VEERS issues need to be addressed, and we need to build those into the program. And I think from a security perspective, to the program's credit, they're looking at options to keep costs down, so that's a good thing.
Are we ever going to get to a point where we really won't see any hefty jumps in the program cost estimates every year, year after year? Both of you?
Hopefully, there'll be greater stability once NPP flies and we start looking at the performance with the operational bird at that point in time. I think that's when there'll be more stability.
I agree with that. We need to finish testing on the VIRS system, and we need to launch NPP. At that point, I think we'll be close to out of the woods on what the system will really cost.
My time is expired, and let me yield to the member, Mr. Inglis.
For a brief question, I've got a corollary to the Bartlett theory of bureaucracy. Dr. Bartlett described the reasons for bureaucratic delay could be 1, incompetence, 2, too much work, and 3, not enough work, and the work expands to the time available. I think that a fourth possibility is that when you have a complex, difficult project that encounters a slowdown, it moves to the front corner of the desk. When that slowdown goes on for a week or two, it moves to the floor. And when that file hits the floor, it is an enormous amount of mental energy to bring it back up onto the desk. So I wonder if what we're learning here is that one agency should have owned this. And I guess the idea was to prevent 3 from launching satellites, so therefore let's get some efficiencies, economies of scale by having just 1. But I wonder if one should have owned it, with the 2 others being customers or tenants on that piece that's owned by the 1. Either of you got thoughts about that?
That is a model that looks awfully good right now to me, but I think, I have to admit, I was not in on the original discussions in the 90s. I was in the Navy at the time, and I didn't want the Navy anywhere near this, so we stayed out of it. But the discussions went on at high levels, and it was finally decided, I will tell you, it was decided by the White House to how to deal with setting up this program. So it was a lot of work that went into trying to think about this model, and I believe in the fewer complications and executive authority where you really have the authority. The programs that I can manage, and I will come and tell you about, we just got an excellent score on our tsunami warning program, which is now a worldwide system, which you supported. It was a program we started. It was graded by OMB as 93.4. It's only one of 11% of programs in the federal government that got the effective rating from our Office of Management and Budget. It's IOC'd. The buoys are out around the world now providing 24/7 coverage for tsunami warning to the United States. That's a program I can control and put inside. So when you have an agency controlling, you get a much better chance for success on these things. And any time you bring in more agencies, you've got a problem. I have no problem really with separation of responsibilities and having customers that come in with their needs, and you make a decision and move on. And as I said, I would like to look in the alternative management study. I will push that from my end of it to deal with, is there some way to streamline the structure we have today so we don't get into this problem we have now of trying to update the MOA to make sure that DOD's executive authority is exactly prescribed correctly in accordance with what the lawyers think it will work across a 3-agency boundary. Thank you, sir.
Hey, Mr. Bartlett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. This program is typical of many of our programs in DOD. The costs just keep going up and up. When I repeat the Lord's Prayer and I come to that part that says, lead us not into temptation, I wonder how we can enter into some of our contract agreements and still do that prayer. Because when you enter into a contract agreement where the more it costs, the more the contractor makes. We are doing something similar to what the chaplains at Fort Leonard Wood said we were doing when we put young men and women in such close confines, said what we were doing runs contrary to the powers of nature. Somehow we've got to get around this, and I think that pushing the envelope and not knowing definitively what can be done when you start the program is a major reason for this. But at the end of the day, we say, gee, you really ought to get 15% profit. And so the reality is that the worse they do, that is, the more it costs, the more they make. How do we get around that?
If you look at the fee management plan for this program, it's been reduced down to 12 to 13%. So they can't get any. We've already reduced it below that, and there's only 2% of that which can be what I would say judgmental. The rest of it is tied to meeting requirements on the newly or the non-McCurdy revised schedule and performance. So they are under the gun, and they are being given their so-called reward based on their ability to perform. And in many areas they've not been doing well. In other areas they have been doing well, because as I mentioned, 4 of these instruments are on track. The buses, so there's mixed. It's a mixed blessing from the contractor's point of view. But what you bring to account is the idea of the cost plus contract, which is an issue. And that's kind of a philosophical discussion. Do we save money on cost plus contracts even though they go over, or would it be better to try to go fixed price up front? When you try to do that for a development area where you really don't know what you're doing in terms of what you can develop, we've had a lot of trouble with that too. So that's another part of the decision. I don't like the cost plus programs. I certainly don't like them for NOAA, because NOAA is an operational agency. I think the research should be done elsewhere, and when we get an instrument, we should just buy it, and there should be a price and a contractor that produces it, and we will execute it. We are a 24/7 operational agency. I don't like the idea of taking on development risk within the NOAA framework. We have other agencies that do that, and where their strong point, what I believe is their strong point, and I've been a strong proponent of planning together across the agencies develop space instruments versus the agencies that use them. So I think that's a critical need for us to work on as a government.
For 16 years now, I've been watching programs in DOD, and almost never do we come in on time, on budget. And it would seem that we ought to learn a little from history, and someone, maybe GAO, needs to take a look at this. And this is a long history. It precedes by many years my short 16 years of watching this process. How come we never get it right? And this program is just typical of many of our programs, and you're not unique in the problems that you have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. And we're running a little bit out of time, close on our votes that we have, and so I'm going to be very quick. I wanted to make a corrected statement that I made at the very, very beginning when I talked about a gentleman who received an award the other day with whom I had gone to college, and then you began talking about the tsunami program, Dr. Eddie Bernard, and I said Dr. Eddie Beaumont. I meant Dr. Eddie Bernard from Beaumont, Texas. Pardon my getting ahead of my tongue got faster than my brain was working apparently. But Dr. Bernard is the director of the Pacific Marine Environment Laboratory, and has done significant work. And obviously his role that he played in creating that tsunami warning system is something that we're all very, very proud of. And I'm proud to have known that I sat in some of the same classes with him. I just wish I had learned more along the way. Thank you all for being here, and the panel members for raising the questions that we've done today. And hopefully we will move this program forward, because we know how critically important it is to our whole country. And this earth. So thank you for appearing before the committee this morning, and under the rules of the committee, the record will be held open for 2 weeks for members to submit additional statements and any additional questions that they might have for the witnesses. This hearing is now adjourned.